Imagine a night when the wind howls so fiercely it feels like it could rip the very soul out of the trees. A snowstorm has swallowed every light in the village, leaving homes buried in an absolute suffocating whiteness. And you tell me honestly, would you have dared to step into that brutal cold, or would you have hidden behind the fragile safety of your walls? Tonight, we'll follow the story of a boy who did step out. But before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to this channel and support the conservation of wolves. Because this story is not only about survival, it's about the bond between fear and compassion. For the villagers, that haunting sound was the voice of a wandering ghost. They bolted. Their doors drew their curtains tight and whispered prayers into the silence. Nobody dared to face it. Nobody except a boy who had nothing to lose. His name was Mateo. Orphaned since childhood, he lived at the far edge of the village in a crooked wooden cabin that groaned with every gust of wind. When the howl cut through the storm that night, it pierced him like a command he couldn't ignore. While the snow erased human tracks and turned the earth into a white abyss, Mateo chose to follow the echo. His coat was worn thin, his boots cracked with age. Each step was a battle against the storm. Yet something inside told him this wasn't just a sound carried by the wind. This was a call directed at him. No one in the village knew that night. No one could have guessed that Mateo's choice would change forever how humans remembered that howl. Because what he discovered in the storm would leave them breathless. Mateo's name was barely spoken in the village. He had no parents to protect him, no siblings to walk beside him. His mother had died giving birth on a cruel winter night. His father, a quiet but strong lumberjack, was lost to the icy river during a sudden flood. From then on, Mateo was simply the orphan at the edge of the village. Pity followed him, but true closeness never did. His home was humble twisted logs, a leaking roof, a tiny wood stove that barely held back the biting cold. Yet in this forgotten corner of the village, Mateo had learned resilience. He could spark fire with frozen hands, track fox from dog, and hear the forest's voice like a secret language only he could understand. Winter in the north showed no mercy. The winds of Alaska swept over the mountains, freezing rivers breaking century-old trees. Villagers relied on their livestock and their woodpiles. Words were few, work was plenty. But in the rhythm of survival, one mystery remained: wolves. To the adults, wolves were menace embodied. Stories spread of sheep dragged off in the night, paw prints circling the corrals, howls that foreshadowed disaster. But to Mateo, those cries meant something else. Since childhood, he had heard in them a kind of mirror. Distant voices that seemed to understand what it was like to be alone. The howl that pulled him from his cabin that night wasn't the first he had heard, but it was the most desperate. It carried no warning, no dominance. It was pain. It was a plea. And Mateo, who so often had felt his own voice fade into the indifference of the village, couldn't ignore it. The forest he entered was a labyrinth of fir trees sagging under snow. Every branch cracked like bones under the storm's weight. The ground was a white trap concealing roots' crevices, even old rusted traps abandoned by hunters. For anyone else venturing out in that storm was pure madness. For an orphan who had grown up on the edge of survival, it was almost instinct. As he trudged forward, his father's voice echoed in his mind. Never follow a howl. It isn't meant for you, it's for the pack. But that warning, instead of halting him, pushed him further. For in truth, Mateo had never had a pack. And maybe tonight, in the heart of the blizzard, destiny was offering him one. The storm roared, yet the howl grew clearer, closer. It wasn't just one cry, it was many broken, jagged weaving together into something that shook his chest. As if the mountain itself breathed with him, time lost all meaning. His fingers went numb, his breath a burning fog in the air. And then suddenly the forest opened into a clearing. There beneath the hardened snow lay a sight that froze his heart. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't an illusion. It was flesh, blood, life. A wolf, a she-wolf, powerful and proud, trapped in a cruel iron snare. Beside her, 3 tiny pups huddled against her bleeding flank, their cries so faint the storm nearly swallowed them whole. Mateo felt the weight of all the world's cold crush into his chest. Here in this single moment, the invisible line between fear and compassion was about to break, and with one step forward, his destiny was sealed. Mateo's heart pounded like a war drum inside his chest. The wind pushed at his back as if forcing him to face the impossible sight before him. The she-wolf's golden eyes locked onto him, wide-wild, a storm of pain and fury. Her body trembled, her paw clamped in the cruel iron jaws of a hunter's trap. Blood stained the snow around her, and pressed against her belly, 3 tiny pups whimpered so weak their cries barely rose above the roar of the storm. For a moment, Mateo thought of running. Every story he had ever heard screamed inside his mind, "Wolves are killers. If she's trapped, she'll still attack. Turn back before it's too late." But his feet didn't move. He stood frozen in the blizzard snow, piling on his shoulders, the lantern shaking in his hand. The wolf growled a deep, low rumble that cut straight to his bones. Her teeth flashed like knives of ice. Mateo stepped back, swallowing hard. And then something shifted. For the briefest instant, her eyes softened. Not surrender, not weakness. Something else, recognition. A flicker of understanding, like a fragile bridge stretched across the storm. Mateo inhaled sharply. He knew the risk. One wrong move and she could tear into him. But if he walked away, those pups would be dead before sunrise. 2 voices battled inside him. Run. Help. His breath came fast, clouds of steam blurring his vision. Finally, he whispered to himself, "If I die here, at least it will be for something that mattered." Slowly, he lifted a stick and wedged it into the iron trap. The metal groaned. The wolf yelped in pain and surprise, lunging forward as far as the chain would allow. Mateo stumbled back, nearly falling into the snow, but he tried again. He braced his boots in the frozen ground, poured every ounce of strength into the stick. The trap creaked, shuddered, then gave. Just enough. The wolf wrenched her paw free. A silence fell heavier than the storm itself. Mateo froze, waiting for the attack that should come. But it never did. The she-wolf stood tall, her body trembling, her breath ragged. She didn't leap. She didn't lunge. Instead, she simply held her ground, shielding her pups with her body. And then she stepped aside just barely, as if granting him the right to exist in that space. Mateo's chest burned. Something had shifted inside him. He realized the border between human and beast wasn't as solid as he had been taught. Fear could turn into respect, and compassion could melt even the cruelest winter. That night, Mateo didn't just free a wolf. He freed a part of himself he hadn't known was trapped. The part that longed to belong, to protect, to be heard in a world that had silenced him. And what happened next was even more extraordinary. The blizzard showed no mercy. Snow cut across Mateo's face like shards of glass. He knew leaving the wolf and her pups in the clearing meant certain death. He had no plan, no supplies, but he had one thing: the refusal to abandon them. The she-wolf limped, blood dripping from her paw. Her gaze stayed fixed on him, wary, sharp, but no longer filled with blind rage. Mateo gathered branches beneath a cluster of trees and sparked a small fire. The flames fought against the wind, casting a fragile circle of light. He tore a piece of bread from his satchel, hard stale, and placed it gently near the pups. They hesitated. Hunger won. Tiny teeth gnawed clumsily at the crust. The wolf growled low, a warning, but didn't stop them. It was clear closer, but no further. Mateo understood. He stayed still, the fire warming his frozen fingers as he watched the pups eat. The wolf licked her wound, leaving streaks of blood in the snow. Mateo knew it was serious. A memory came to him, an old healer in the village once saying, "Snow stops the bleeding, but it also steals the strength. He tore a strip from his coat, held it out slowly. The wolf's hackles rose, teeth flashing. Mateo paused patient. Then, inch by inch, he reached forward and bound the wound. The touch lasted only a heartbeat, tense as a drawn bowstring. But she didn't strike. She only stared at him as if weighing the courage of his act. Hours passed. The storm raged, but inside that fragile ring of firelight, something new took shape. Mateo and the wolf were not friends, not yet. But they were survivors sharing the same fragile border between life and death. At one point, one of the pups stumbled close to Mateo. The little body brushed against his knee. He froze. One wrong move and the mother would end him. But she didn't. She just watched. The pup sniffed at Mateo's boot, then scurried back to safety. It was a moment so brief it could have gone unnoticed, yet it changed everything. The fire crackled, smoke twisting into the storm. Mateo kept watch with a burning branch in hand. He knew the forest held more than cold bears. Lynx, even other wolves might come. Blood was an invitation. A sudden crack echoed through the trees. Mateo shot to his feet, heart hammering. The wolf rose too, her fur bristling, a growl slicing through the blizzard. He gripped the burning branch, ready to fight, but the sound faded. Only a snow-laden branch had snapped. The night crept on. The fire dimmed. And yet, in that clearing, an unspoken pact had formed. They would survive the storm together. Dawn crept into the sky, pale and cold. The storm had passed, leaving behind a silence so sharp it rang in Mateo's ears. He knew the wolf and her pups couldn't survive out in the clearing. Not like this. The fire was nearly gone, the mother limping badly, her pups too weak to last another day in the open. Mateo rose to his feet, gathering what little he had. There was only one chance: the abandoned barn near the edge of the village. Far enough from the people to avoid panic, sturdy enough to keep the family alive through the cold. The she-wolf's eyes followed him warily. When Mateo pointed toward the path, she didn't move. But then, after a long pause, she limped forward slowly, cautiously, her pups scrambling after her. It wasn't obedience, it was a truce. And so a sight unthinkable took form: a ragged orphan boy leading a wounded wolf and her pups through the snow as though they belonged to the same pack. The sun broke weakly through the clouds, staining the world with gray light. The snow gleamed white and endless. Mateo trudged ahead, his legs heavy, his breath steaming in the frozen air. He knew the path. He had walked it many times to gather firewood. But today, it felt strange, alien. Every tree seemed to loom taller, every silence deeper. That was when the ground-shaking roar split the air. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't the storm, it was closer, hungrier. The she-wolf froze, her fur standing on end. The pups whimpered and buried themselves under her belly. Mateo felt the blood drain from his face. Between the trees, a massive shadow moved. An enormous brown bear, ribs showing from weeks of hunger, had caught the scent of blood. Mateo knew the truth instantly. Fighting a bear was suicide. Not even wolves hunted them alone. But there was no escape. To run meant leaving the pups, and that was something he could not do. His hands shook as he grabbed a branch, set its tip alight with the last embers of his torch. Flames sputtered weakly in the cold air, but it was enough to draw a line in the snow. The bear emerged fully, a living avalanche. Its paws sank deep into the drifts, its breath fogging the air, its eyes blazing with hunger. The she-wolf snarled, coiling her body protectively in front of her pups. Blood stained her bandaged paw, yet she stood tall, refusing to yield. Mateo screamed with everything inside him, waving the burning branch. Sparks flew, smoke rising. The bear hesitated, but only for a moment. Then it charged. The ground shook beneath Mateo's boots. His throat burned with his cries. The fire hissed as flakes of snow fell against the flames. The bear came closer, unstoppable. And then the wolf howled, a sound so sharp and raw it cut through the valley. From the distant mountains, another howl answered. then another, until the air trembled with voices echoing, surrounding, multiplying. The bear faltered, glancing around. The forest itself seemed to awaken, filled with the chorus of unseen wolves. Mateo seized the chance. He lunged forward and plunged the burning branch into the snow before the bear's massive paws. Sparks exploded upward. The beast roared, jerking back. The she-wolf, despite her injury, moved to Mateo's side. Together, boy and wolf, they stood shoulder to shoulder, defying the monster. For a long, tense moment, the bear stared, its rage clashing with the firelight and the thunder of the howls. Finally, with a furious snort, it turned and lumbered back into the trees, swallowed by the mist. Mateo collapsed into the snow, his chest heaving, every muscle burning. The wolf, trembling, turned her head toward him. Their eyes met. No growl, no threat, only a silent acknowledgement they had survived together. The pups tumbled from hiding, bounding clumsily toward their mother. She licked them tenderly, then raised her muzzle and let out another howl. But this time it wasn't pain, it was triumph. Mateo stared at the sky, the sound ringing in his bones. For the first time in his life, he felt less like an orphan, and more like a member of a pack. The path to the barn was long, but the storm had passed. The air was clearer now, though the cold still gnawed at Mateo's skin. He pressed on the wolf, limping close behind her pups, waddling through the snow on unsteady legs. Finally, the abandoned barn appeared through the haze, a wooden skeleton weathered and forgotten. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. Inside, Mateo cleared a corner, piling old hay into a bed for the wolf and her pups. She entered slowly, head low, her eyes darting across the darkened space. When she finally settled, curling around her pups, the tension in Mateo's chest eased. For the first time in what felt like forever, he allowed himself to breathe. That night, as the wolf slept fitfully, Mateo sat near the entrance, feeding the fire he had built in a rusty tin. He wasn't their master. He wasn't even their protector. But he was their ally, if only for now. The next morning, trouble came. A group of men from the village had been checking the corrals after the storm. That was when they found them fresh tracks. Wolf prints. Too close. Too dangerous. Alarm spread quickly. The villagers followed the trail, weapons in hand, muttering of curses and omens. The tracks led straight to the barn. When they opened the doors, what they saw froze them in their tracks. Mateo sitting in the straw, sharing his meager bread with 3 wolf pups, while a wounded she-wolf glared at them from the shadows. The shouting began immediately. "He's lost his mind. He'll bring death to us all. Kill them before it's too late." Mateo scrambled to his feet, hands raised. "Wait. You don't understand. She was trapped, bleeding if I hadn't." But his words drowned beneath the fury. To them, wolves weren't victims. Wolves were predators, and predators near the village meant danger. The mayor was called. Soon the meeting hall filled with angry voices, torches blazing. Some demanded hunters from neighboring towns. Others insisted the pups be taken to a zoo. One man shouted that the law was clear: no wolves in captivity, no exceptions. Mateo's chest tightened. He had risked everything for those creatures, faced storms, hunger, even a bear. And now, because of fear, the village wanted to take them away. Then, from the back of the hall, a voice rose above the chaos. It belonged to the village elder, an old woman known for her tales of the past. She leaned on her cane, her eyes sharp as the winter stars. "All my life," she said, "I have heard wolves spoken of as monsters. But what I see here is not a monster. It is a mother who suffered and a boy who dared to see her suffering. He did not see an enemy. He saw life." Her words brought a hush to the room. Some looked down ashamed, others shifted uneasily, but the mayor's face was stern. "Even so, the law is not ours to break. Wolves belong in the wild or in the hands of conservationists. We cannot harbor them here." The elder bowed her head. "Then let it be the conservationists. But never say again that wolves are only shadows in the dark. Mateo left the meeting with fire in his chest. His fists clenched, his eyes burning. He had done the unthinkable, saved a wolf, shared her pain, fought beside her, and now he would have to say goodbye. Then, from the back of the hall, a voice rose above the chaos. It belonged to the village elder, an old woman known for her tales of the past. She leaned on her cane, her eyes sharp as the winter stars. "All my life," she said, "I have heard wolves spoken of as monsters. But what I see here is not a monster. It is a mother who suffered and a boy who dared to see her suffering. He did not see an enemy. He saw life." Her words brought a hush to the room. Some looked down ashamed, others shifted uneasily. But the mayor's face was stern. "Even so, the law is not ours to break. Wolves belong in the wild or in the hands of conservationists. We cannot harbor them here." The elder bowed her head. "Then let it be the conservationists. But never say again that wolves are only shadows in the dark." Mateo left the meeting with fire in his chest. His fists clenched, his eyes burning. He had done the unthinkable, saved a wolf, shared her pain, fought beside her, and now he would have to say goodbye. Morning came gray and heavy. The village still slept, but in the old barn on the outskirts, Mateo knew the time had arrived. He had thought through every possibility during the night. He could run with the wolves into the forest, hide them deep in the mountains. But sooner or later, hunters would find them, and then it would end in blood. The mayor's words echoed in his mind. They must be handed over to the conservation center. There they will be safe. And so will we. It was a harsh truth, but a truth nonetheless. The village would never accept them. And Mateo's love could not protect them from a world that saw them only as danger. He stood quietly, looking at the 3 pups curled in the hay. Their tiny chests rose and fell, oblivious to the decision being made for them. The she-wolf's eyes found his deep and fierce, but no longer wild. Mateo knelt, his voice low and trembling. "I can't keep you. If I try, I'll condemn you. But if I let you go, I lose you." The she-wolf tilted her head as though she understood. Morning came gray and heavy. The village still slept, but in the old barn on the outskirts, Mateo knew the time had arrived. He had thought through every possibility during the night. He could run with the wolves into the forest, hide them deep in the mountains. But sooner or later, hunters would find them. And then it would end in blood. The mayor's words echoed in his mind. They must be handed over to the conservation center. There they will be safe, and so will we. It was a harsh truth, but a truth nonetheless. The village would never accept them, and Mateo's love could not protect them from a world that saw them only as danger. He stood quietly, looking at the 3 pups curled in the hay. Their tiny chests rose and fell, oblivious to the decision being made for them. The she-wolf's eyes found his deep and fierce, but no longer wild. Mateo knelt, his voice low and trembling. "I can't keep you. If I try, I'll condemn you. But if I let you go, I lose you." The she-wolf tilted her head as though she understood. That day, Mateo led the wolves down the path to the forest's edge. Waiting there were the volunteers from the conservation center, men and women with heavy gloves, large crates, and the practiced calm of those who had seen wildness before. From a distance, the villagers watched in silence. To them, this was an end. To Mateo, it was something far greater, a farewell he was not ready to make. When the strangers approached, the she-wolf bared her teeth, a deep growl vibrating in her chest. The pups pressed closer to her. Mateo stepped forward quickly, lifting a hand. His voice was steady, though his heart pounded. "Trust." The wolf's eyes locked on his. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then slowly, she lowered her muzzle, letting the men guide her toward the crate. The pups followed, whining, confused but obedient. The air grew so still, you could hear the snow fall. Even the villagers who had once cried for their death were struck silent by the dignity of the scene. This wasn't defeat. It was trust. At the final moment, as the crate door shut, something happened that Mateo would never forget. The she-wolf turned her head. Her eyes searched for him, finding him in the crowd. For one heartbeat, they held each other's gaze. Then she lifted her muzzle and howled. The sound tore through the air, raw and endless. It echoed across the mountains, bouncing back in a chorus that seemed to come from every peak. It was no longer a cry of pain. It was a song, a farewell, a promise, a vow. The villagers shifted uneasily. Some wiped at their eyes. Even the mayor bowed his head. For Mateo, the sound pierced deeper than any storm ever could. He stood motionless, letting the echo fill him until it became part of his own heartbeat. And when the crates were lifted and carried away, he remained standing in the snow, his hands trembling, the howl still ringing in his chest. He didn't know if he would ever see her again, but he knew one thing: he would never be alone the same way again. Time moved on. The winter dragged, but Mateo was no longer the same boy who once stared out a frosted window alone. The villagers began to look at him differently. Some still feared what he had done, but others whispered of his courage. Even the mayor, once his harshest critic, admitted quietly one evening, "Your act was reckless, but also brave. You showed us that not every wolf is an enemy." Mateo carried those words like a hidden treasure. Then, one day, as the ice began to break and spring returned, a messenger arrived from the conservation center. The wolves had survived. The she-wolf's leg had healed. The pups were strong, running and playing, learning the wild ways they were meant to know. The messenger handed Mateo a scrap of cloth, frayed, stained with dried blood, the very piece he had torn from his coat to bind her wound. The center had kept it a reminder of the moment when a boy and a wolf first bridged the distance between fear and trust. Mateo held the cloth to his chest. Tears welled in his eyes, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were gratitude.